Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the United College of the Chinese University of Hong Kong and the Denell International Scholars Academy of the Washington University in St. Louis, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. To kick off this afternoon's program, we are pleased to have Professor Jimmy Yu, Head of United College, CUHK, to deliver the welcome address. Professor Yu, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of United College, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, I'm pleased to welcome you all to this forum on the economic outlook of China. It is very encouraging to see so many students and, of course, so many experts representing a wide range of economic and international organizations across Asia and Pacific in this room today. This is really part of the 60th anniversary of the United College. And we consider this one of the kick-off events. So I hope you will enjoy it. I would like to express my gratitude to the Medano International Scholars Academy, Washington University in St. Louis. Without their support, this forum would not be possible. And actually, Professor Peng Wang is a very good friend of the college. And the Medano Academy, they offers a scholarship for student exchange next summer. So please pay attention, dear students, to take this opportunity to visit one of the best universities in the States. China's economic successes have captured the world's attention. Despite the weak recovery and rising uncertainties in the global economy this year, the Chinese economy is still moving very steadily. What will China look like in the years to come? I am sure that the panels would offer you some suggestions and insights. So may I wish this forum every success, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Professor Yu. Before the beginning of our panel discussion, we'll have souvenir presentation and group photos taken first. So may I now invite Professor Jimmy Yu to present souvenirs to other guest speakers to the forum. Professor Yu, please. As you can see, the souvenir is an acrylic painting of the United College. Let me now present to you the guest speakers to receive the souvenirs. Professor Jensen Zhang, Chairman, Department of Economics, CUHK. Thank you, Professor Zhang. Next, we'll have Professor Francis Lo, Director, Center for Economic Development, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Thank you, Professor Lo. Next, we'll have Mr. Peter Yang, CEO, Camp Central Group. Thank you, Mr. Yang. Next, we'll have Professor McKillip Baldwin, Joseph Guston Hoyt Distinguished Professor of Economics and Arts and Science, Department of Economics, Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you, Professor Baldwin. Next, we'll have Professor Michael Song, Department of Economics, CUHK. Thank you, Professor Song. Next, we'll have Professor Yun Wing Song, Co-Director, Economic Research Center, Hong Kong Institute of Asia-Pacific Studies, COHK. Thank you, Professor Song. Last but not least, we'll have Professor Ping Wang, Siegel Family Distinguished Professor, Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you, Professor Wang. And now, let us now take 2 group photos to mark this precious moment. So, first of all, may we have Professor Yu and all our guest speakers, Professor Shang, Professor Lu, Mr. Yang, Professor Bodrin, Professor Song, and Professor Wang to come to the front to have a group photo. Thank you all, and please stay to take one more photo with other guests. May I now invite Mrs. Charles Koh, Professor Yin Chi Wang, Professor Chong Ki Yip, Ms. Lina Yan, Mr. Yang Sheng Yao, Mr. Anders Lam, Professor Stephen Wong, Professor Hao Shan Kwan, and Professor Bali Mak to come to join the group photos, please. Thank you very much to our guests. The photo taking ends. Please all be seated. It is now time for our panel discussion. To start with, let me introduce our moderator, Professor Jensen Xiang, Chairman of the Department of Economics, COHK, to lead the panel discussion. Professor Xiang, please.
Yeah, so I'm very honored to chair this session. There's nothing to moderate, actually. It's just a chair session, a session chair, right? So everyone has 18 minutes, okay, and must finish within 20 minutes, and that is a rule. So when you have 2 minutes left or 2 or 3 minutes left, I will raise my hand, that means you need to wrap up. Okay. Okay. So we are very pleased to have 4 very distinguished speakers today. So the first one is Professor Ray from UST. So let's welcome.
I haven't been here for many years, for several decades, but I used to work for some time at this building, Siêu Long Lầu. Okay. Now that was the home of the Economic Research Center a long time ago. Well, because I know that Jun Sung is a very tough moderator, so I will try very hard to limit my time. Usually when I plan to speak for 5 minutes, it will turn out to be more than 2 hours. So, okay. Let me see how. Now, the topic of today is to talk about China's economic growth, the obstacles and the engines. If we look at this table, well, it appears that in the old days, the average real GDP growth rate was pretty high. But since last year, it has gone down quite significantly to, say, 7.4%. We don't know the exact figure this year yet, but it's likely to be somewhere between maybe 6.8% or 6.9%. We still have to wait for say, maybe a couple of months in order to know that. So given these figures, obviously we have to ask the question, well, is the very high growth rate of China coming to an end, or is this just a kind of cyclical thing, or structural, or or some people have been worrying about whether China will be falling into this middle income trap. Okay, so let us try to see what will happen. Now, in order to find out whether the Chinese economic growth can continue or not, we have to figure out what the engines of growth are. And of course, we also have to find out what the obstacles are, or the barriers to growth, as Professor Michael Song will be talking about later on today. Okay? I've done a little bit of GDP growth accounting. This GDP accounting is based on production function, estimated along the line of that Gregory Chow has pioneered. And I have not presented the details of the production function here, but then it's more or less a kind of a Cobb-Douglas production function. I don't mean to say that the estimation will be necessarily be very accurate, but these figures at least will help us figure out well, what have been happening. Now, if we compare the period 1978 to 1990 with the more recent period, the year 2000 to 2013, then we see that the contribution of labor to the GDP growth has been declining. During that period, is still, the 2000 to 2013, well, the labor was still able to contribute to 1.8% of the total GDP growth. But obviously, you can see that the labor is becoming less and less important. And China's so-called demographic premium is coming to an end. So for any future growth, I don't think that we can rely too much on that. And you can also see that capital has been playing a very important role, maybe quantitatively speaking, the most important role. For the growth of GDP from the year 2000 to 2013, 76.3% of the growth of the GDP was due to the capital accumulation. As is well known, China accumulates capital very rapidly. The savings rate is very high, and so on and so forth. And I will say more about that in just a minute. China's total factor productivity growth, which measures the efficiency of in the production process, has also been playing a very important factor. However, as you can see, this TFP contribution has also been declining somewhat. It's still significant, but there is some kind of downward trend in the share played by the TFP. Okay, so we can see that the engine of growth, the main engine of growth, was capital accumulation. Well, how come that capital accumulation is so important? It's simply because China saves a lot and invests a lot. The gross domestic savings rate of China is about, well, usually it's around 50% of the GDP. That's among the highest in the world. Usually, Singapore and China would compete with each other on which one is the highest. But at the time that I got the data, Singapore was a little bit higher. Singapore is a little bit over 50%. And then part of the saving will go to the domestic investment. The fixed capital formation in 2013 was 45.9% of the GDP. This is, again, among the highest in the world. So people in China do not consume that much. A lot of this is saved, and the large chunk of the saving is put into this domestic investment. Of course, China also invests overseas, but then that would not affect the GDP per se. It would affect the GNP, but not the GDP. And as I've said, the demographic premium has been disappearing. Now, when we see this kind of situation, or the situation when the economy depends a great deal on capital accumulation, then a natural question would arise: whether the law of diminishing returns play a significant role. When you build the first highway, that the marginal contribution of that highway could be very important. But if you have already got 1,000 highways, then an additional highways contribution may not really be that large. Well, certainly, diminishing returns will play a role in the future growth of China, but we have to make some estimate of how big that is. The capital stocks in China per capita is still very much below those of the developed countries like the United States. Okay, and moreover, if we don't want the diminishing returns to be playing too big a role, then we really need the total factor productivity to keep on improving at a significant rate. Okay. Now, so I have also tried to answer a question here. Well, the current policy of the Chinese government now seems to be implying that consumption in China is too low. So the Chinese government tried to stimulate consumption. I won't say that that is necessarily a wrong policy. It really depends. However, we know that high consumption would mean lower capital accumulation, and lower capital accumulation could mean lower GDP in the future. And economists all understand that there's a way to figure this out, and that is the so-called golden rule of investment. What would be the optimal investment rate as a share of GDP so that the present value of all your future consumption will be maximized? I cannot compute the present value of all the future consumption. That's too big a job, but I've tried to maximize the discounted value of the total consumption for, say, 30 years. actually is a little bit less than 30 years. It's up to 2042. I mean, by using the numbers that I've been using. And I've been using a discount rate of 4% for calculating the present value. And then, well, now the optimal, the golden rule of investment rate. Well, according to my calculation, would depend, of course, it depends on how fast the productivity growth is. If the TFP growth is very fast, then it will certainly make sense to invest more. If the efficiency has not been improving, then of course it's better for you to consume more today. So according to this, well, if the TFP growth is 2.18%, which is the average from the year 2000 to the year 2013, then the golden rule investment rate is 47.6%. And if the TFP growth is 0%, then the golden rule rate is 39.9%. Okay. Well, I was very surprised when I saw these figures because I thought that the savings rate or investment rate in China were too high. Well, that reminds me that a few years ago when I was in the same lecture theater with one of my former teachers, Everett Prescott. Some people asked him whether the Chinese savings rate was too high, and he just commented that it was just correct. Well, I would believe that he was making this comment out of nothing. I don't think that he had the evidence to say that the Chinese saving rate was optimal. But surprisingly, when I try to do the calculations, it appears to me that Prescott was correct. Maybe he was lucky, so he did not seem to make a mistake. So now China's investment rate is very close to this 47.6%. Now many people have been worrying about this so-called middle income trap, and indeed. Nobody can surely preclude that possibility. People can only say something about the likelihood. One thing that I can say is that, well, for many of those countries that have fallen into this middle income trap, like some of the Latin American countries, do not have the same characteristics of the Chinese economy. For one thing, they don't save that much. They spend a lot of money. They don't save that much. But at least during the last couple of decades, the Chinese people saved a lot. Okay, that savings rate may go down in the future. Nobody can say that it will always be maintained at such a high level. But then, even if the savings rate goes down, it will take quite a long time. And if the savings rate is that high and capital accumulation is still playing a very important role, then I would say that significant and continuous growth is still possible. I won't say that it is inevitable, but it is quite possible. So really, we're trying for, our real question is how are we going to adopt the right policies so that we can increase the chance that China will not be trapped at the middle income level. Of course, the most important thing to do is to maintain a robust growth rate in the productivity. So that would bring us into another related issue. Many people have been talking about this excess capacity or overproduction in China. If we look at the data, then certainly for some particular sectors like the steel industry, they have overproduced. And many people do not just like to buy some of their products. I've been told that in terms of weight, steel is less expensive than cabbage. They call it 大白菜, 大白菜, okay? So that is a sure sign that they have really produced too much steel. And if we try to invest even more and produce the same thing, then clearly the Chinese economy will get into some trouble. However, when we see that there is over-investment or excess capacity, we also observe that in some other sectors there's under-investment. So the key issue is not over or under. The key issue is what you are going to invest in, whether resources are allocated correctly. There are certainly many areas that there is under-investment, but I would just try to single out the environmental protection. China does not use this concept of the green GDP, but I think that in the future it should. Improving the environment will bring utility to the people. So in that sense, it's just like improving the GDP. It may not be counted as part of the GDP, but there's only a problem of the accounting system. It's not due to a substantive issue. Okay, so the issue now that you have to say is to identify profitable investment opportunities, and I always believe that the private sector is more capable in doing that compared to the government. Okay, in fact, structural changes are going on. Oh, 5 more minutes. Okay, so I have to be quick. Okay. Now, the composition of the GDP. Now, let us look at this now. From these numbers, there's a clear trend that some structural changes have been going on in China. The service sector has become the largest sector in China now. So China's industry in manufacturing, of course, is very important, but the service sector has already surpassed that. And in 1978, it was only 24.5%, and now it's 40. Last year, it was 48.1%. That kind of structural changes towards a service is only one of the important trends happening in China. That is an important one, but there is also another important thing: urbanization and infrastructure. In 1978, there were 193 cities and towns in China. Now we are talking about 658 cities in China, and the urban population has gone up by 577 million. I think that this is among the largest migration in world history. Recently, I read an article by Paul Romer, and he is talking about some even more major urbanization in the next 100 years in the whole world. Okay, but that will be mainly in the less developed countries. So urbanization could imply that a lot of the previously useless infrastructures or white elephants could suddenly become somewhat useful. I still can remember that a long time ago when I traveled in China. I mean, there were some highways which had no cars, but now when you go to the same place, there are lots of cars going on. So something useless thing can become useful, and productivity of the people in the cities tend to be much higher than the productivities in the rural areas. Urbanization could create a lot of other problems. For example, this so-called left behind children. And some estimates would put the so-called left behind children as to around 60 million people. That could be a major headache for China in the future. Okay, education. In order to improve the TFP, we need to invest in education. The number of new entrants to universities and colleges have gone up by more than 7 times. That is really mind-boggling. I don't think that they have enough teachers to suddenly handle a student body which is more than 7 times more. Therefore, it is a good time for you to go into postgraduate studies. After you are finished, I mean, the job opportunities could be pretty big. I mean, could be pretty good. I mean, but when we are looking at these numbers, we are essentially looking at the numbers only at the quality. There's no indication about the quality here. And there is something that we have to worry somewhat about. The public expenditure on education as a share of GDP has gone up somewhat. James Heckman complained bitterly that China invested too little in education, but it has gone up somewhat, 3.8%. It's not great, but it's just better than before. I think that it should move it up to, say, something like 5% of GDP or so. Okay, but the private sector or the families in China invest a lot in the education of the children. So that lack of investment by the government is somehow made up or offset by the family investment. R&D 2.02%. Now again, in terms of quality, in terms of quantity, China is improving. The magazine, okay, one more minute, okay. The magazine Nature used to publish the number of articles published in the top 68 journals. China now is number two in the world, but we also have to worry that some of these articles could suffer from plagiarism and falsification of data. Okay, so Nature also have that kind of data. So Nature is a very good magazine to read. Some of the articles are totally technical. I cannot understand any one of those, but it also reports on a lot of news. Okay, so those news are very interesting. Just 30 more seconds. I don't think I can finish, but then anti-corruption campaign. I have a lot of concern about this. Okay, well, corruption is of course morally wrong, totally wrong. But in the way that China is doing it, it may slow down a lot of the decision makings, a lot of the activities that could be conducted by especially the government officials at the county level. Stephen Chung has this great theory in the past that the counties try to compete with each other and then things have been made efficient. I don't think that his model will still apply to China now. But at least this anti-corruption campaign is slowing down the whole thing. And well, fighting against corruption is correct, but China should also correct the incentive structure. For example, raising the salaries of the government officials. Otherwise, they just have no incentive to work hard. Okay, I don't think that I should occupy the time to talk about the other issues. Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Distinguished speaker, Mr. Yang. Right.
Okay. Unlike the other panelists, I am not in the academia. I'm actually the owner of my private business. And I graduated from Washington University about 35 years ago in chemical engineering. And then subsequently I worked in the United States for 3 years and then returned to Hong Kong to start a business with a partner in supplying industrial products to China. And that was back in 1983. And that's about 32 years ago that I started this business in trade with China. And so I wanted to perhaps, give you some updates, some of the issues that we are facing when it comes to doing businesses in China today from a practical and actually a day-to-day occurring type of situation. But with a limited amount of time that we have, I think that it's very difficult to go through in more detail. So I'm just going to sort of give some bits and pieces, odds and ends, and I thought that these may be enlightening, and you're welcome to talk with me after the discussions. And I wanted to also let you know that I brought with me a couple of items which I'm happy to, I brought some extra copies, so if you want to bring them. One of them is a publication by the World Bank that just came out recently, and it ranked all the countries in the world in the ease of doing business. It's the Ease of Doing Business Index. So if you read this, you'll find out, you know, they've got a lot of graphs and charts and things, and shows which country is easier to do business with. Another one is this. This is something that is interesting in the sense that the U.S. government, because many U.S. companies have ran into disputes when they are trading or when they're making investments or doing businesses with China, that the U.S. government actually posted on their website a very detailed instruction sheet that you need to pay attention to avoid disputes and how to resolve disputes. So China is becoming a very important economy. Many countries in the world wants to do business with China. It is an economic heavyweight. The renminbi is becoming more and more an important currency. And so more enterprises, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, are asking questions and coming to talk to people like myself and asking questions on how to do business with China. So this is something that you may want to have a look at about this, because in the effect and in reality, doing business with China is quite difficult. Doing business with Hong Kong is very easy, but doing business with China is actually quite challenging, quite difficult, and quite involved. I thought many people probably need to think a little bit what their strategy are. So what I have done is that one of our company's divisions, Scandia, had been working with countries in Northern Europe, in Estonia, in Latvia, and Lithuania. And they have been asked by these business partners how to sell their consumer products to China. And I thought that we just use these materials and sort of go through it quickly, because there may be some interesting thoughts in these slices which may be of interest to you, because basically it's something that I put together on when these countries and many SMEs, they're asking a question, they read a lot of news about China, say, you know, we want to do some business with China, but how do we go about doing business with China? So I mentioned here a little bit about our organization, which are that we've been in international trade and investments for 32 years. And we are a medium-sized trade and investment company, started in 1983. And that we have branches and offices and warehouses in Shanghai, Guangzhou, Qingdao, Ningbo, and Jilin province, and in Riga, which is in Latvia. And these are some of the product brands that we've been bringing into both the Hong Kong market and also the China mainland market. And there are a lot of perhaps news about China, about the large populations and big spenders shopping in Paris and London, a lot of new buildings. And so people must be aware that China, whilst has been very successful in raising the standard of living of its population, is still a developing country. So it is still got some long ways to go. Let's take a look at the per capita GDP here. That you can see where Hong Kong fits in, about 41,000. And you can see where Russian fits in at about almost 13,000 US, and China is about 7,600. So China fits in as a developing country. And this World Bank index I just put out to you, and you can see where China fits in, that Singapore being number one, our Hong Kong sometimes gyrates from a few of the position, but usually it's one of the top few, and here it goes into number 3. Those countries in Northern Europe, somewhere 17, 23, 24, Belarus 57, Russia 62, and China at 90. Now this is put out by the World Bank. This is not something that I made up. And so China is not considered a country that is easy to do business in. And then I think this is a widely quoted index. It's the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, which ranks what people think about these countries, whether they're how corrupted they are. And China is ranked 100. And Russia is at 136. Now, what is, I think, very interesting when you look at these figures is that for about 30 years of opening up and reform, I'm unsure China has actually progressed up the ladder in these areas, which is interesting in that sense. And so with all the international business activities and the fact that it's becoming a bigger player in the world, maybe you can look at it the other way, that in fact, China is perhaps bringing the entire world down in many of these indexes. Just the sheer weight of China is perhaps bringing down the rest of the world rather than bring up the rest of the world. That China is, to me, kind of surprising that it's still in a very, maybe you can say low number or high number in these studies. Now, this is a point that Professor Lui, I thought that the issues that you brought up, one of the things that I thought may be interesting, that 30 years of opening up reform in China, is that the legal infrastructure is really non-existent in many ways. It's in fact, there really have not been the kind of legal framework that's been built up to resolve a lot of disputes, a lot of issues, and the legal system is, of course, dictated by the government, local government. So there's not to speak of an independent or separate legal system. So, question for food of thought would be, at what point in time in China, during its development, is it's going to be able to build a semi-type legal system, rather than a non-existent legal system. Okay. All right. Now these we already talked about. I think if you are doing trading with China, I think it's very important that you make sure that you get paid. I have seldom seen people getting paid after they ran into disputes. So if you run into any disputes to do business with mainland China, then you are on your own. And I always thought that it's important when you do business in Asia and including China, that you must do your due diligence on who you are dealing with. And I think this point has not changed. And now that we are in 2015, China may be a much bigger economy, but you should not ignore that you need to know who you're dealing with. I think these are all in the news. I don't think there's anything special about it. That the legal framework issue, I think you all know that the websites, many of the websites are blocked. What I found very interesting this year is actually censorship has increased, not decreased. I think if you've been traveling in China, you'll find that many of the sites, including many university sites, and I haven't checked Washington University sites lately, but some of the university sites may have also been blocked as well. And also emails not only are getting slower, but I think that they are subject more to scrutinization. So, you know, China is consistently ranked as one of the least open, most difficult economy in the world for business people. The question is then, why are you, all the business people, so interested to go to do business in China, attracted by its enormous population, but it's still ranked as one of the most difficult economy to do business in. So it's a very interesting subject. I mean, that could be on its own, is why people are so attracted to China, and yet at the same time, China is such a difficult place to do business. So it kind of moves in two different directions, two totally opposite directions, okay? Now, let's see here. Okay, I think some pictures for you. You're getting bored with the words. This is a very interesting year, and I don't know, as a business person, maybe I'm a little bit superstitious, huh? That I don't know. I kind of got a feeling that during the middle of the year there was this big chemical explosion in Tianjin, and you know, Tianjin is the front door of the capital city of Beijing. And so, as you know, the Beijing is where the capital is, so the gate of heaven. And so when you have a big explosion that is in Tianjin, it's almost as if somebody is setting off firecracker in front of your house. So it's not a good sign. Not a good sign. And in general, if you look back the year of the goat or sheep in the past, if you look back, every year of the sheep or goat has not been very good for China. So you know, so this year is no exception. There's no exception. You know, we had these beginning of these stock market fiasco and the devaluation, which you already know, and also the Soviet-style military parade. Yeah. So we are not out of the blue yet, but it's something for you to think about. Yeah. All right. Now, this is not something that I made up or I wrote. This is something that are statements that are made by the president of the European Chamber of Commerce in China, in Beijing. Now, this is very important because it represents all the countries in the European Union, and European Union is the biggest trading partner in the world with China, all right? So I think you have to read these words a little bit, because by the fact that if these statements are being put out on the site of the European Chamber, it is done without must have been done with very thorough thinking. All right, it's not something that is put out, you know, just on random. All right, so I draw your attention is that the Communist Party leadership overwrought concern with national security issues, expensive wording, and a slate of recent legislation that often obfuscates the law, as well as the slow progress in the overall implementation of market reform, is unsettling for business and causing a loss of confidence. It often seems that the reforms that are meant to benefit foreign companies are ring-fenced in the country's FTZs. European business is therefore asking to what extent China really consider it as part of the reform effort. To continue, says, at best, it leaves a mixed picture, suggesting that part of China's reform agenda including new restrictions, and that the country is even closing off altogether in some areas of its economy. In fact, never before has the European Chamber seen such a contradictory government agenda of reform and closing up. I'm very concerned that the reform momentum has been lost. And this gentleman is the president of the European Chamber in China. Now, the statement came out a few months ago, and it actually, created shockwaves in the business community. But I think you need to do a little bit of thinking why the biggest trading partner with China, their Chamber of Commerce, make a statement of this nature. That means there are certainly quite a bit of disappointment by these members of the European Chamber, and that they felt that it was necessary to voice these concerns. So from that aspect, I think that people needs to be a little bit cautious when it takes to, when you start to think about doing business or business approaches or business and investments with China, at least in the near term, because you need to wait a little bit for how things play out. Right now, things are being played out, but we don't know what's going on. We don't know what is being played out. We are unsure. And even the experts can't tell you because they are unsure. So it's a very interesting, but these are kind of situations that happened over my 32 years in China. It happened quite a few times, that there are things that are sort of hazy face, hazy, sort of like the weather in Beijing, very hazy. And so when you have hazy weather in Beijing, then you know something is happening or something not happening. So I put together a kind of food for thought. I said, is this the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? Okay, another thing I want to show you is that, quite a lot of time people ask me, because we have people that wants to sell all kinds of things to China. And so I'm being asked exactly what the Chinese people eat. And I think we in Hong Kong already knows, but you may be aware that most people in the world are unaware of what the Chinese people eat. So they try to sell the Chinese people all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to show you some pictures of how the Chinese people eat. So these kind of things. Now look here and you can see that there are not many things that Western countries can sell to China because they don't eat too many Western food. But this is the Chinese-style lunch and Chinese-style dinner and drinks. Now the only thing I can find that's foreign is the Coca-Cola, which is made in China. But so now I want to just close up. I think we only have not much time left, but I want to mention about our role in Hong Kong, and I wanted to say a few things about Hong Kong. For last 32 years, 33 years, the role of Hong Kong is very unique, and I believe that Hong Kong is really, really a very viable tool for business people for doing business with China more than any other locations anywhere in the world. And there are people, Europeans, people from the States or Canada, they are going directly to China. Actually, they seem to not think very clearly that Hong Kong, in fact, has got some of the best resources for dealing with China, while China is having a situation like we are now, or when you have a situation where you want to go forward and move forward to be aggressively doing business with China. Hong Kong has its unique role. All right. I want to mention that the Western European economy have been using Hong Kong for many, many years, very successful, and that Hong Kong is a place to build an Asia strategy. Okay? And so if you feel that people who wants to do business with China, still, by and large, there are no other location better than Hong Kong, because you are able to wait your turn when situations are turning a little bit hazy, like we are now. But then, at the same time, you are still keeping a foot in the door so that you can get into China as and when the right time comes in to do the business and get your profitability. Okay, thank you very much.
Some alarming issues in the real business world. Okay, so now we have the next distinguished speaker, Professor Bouldring. Okay, let's welcome him.
Thanks for the invitation and the very kind hospitality. When I was invited to contribute to the panel, I gave some thought to it, and I'm not your China economy expert. And even if I worked most of my life as a theorist, I have a very strong passion for numbers, but not being a true expert. And having learned, so I'm going to follow along Peter's line, that China's macro numbers are not to be trusted. From very many colleagues and students, I decided to get myself out of numbers and into my comparative advantage, which, don't forget, is not an absolute advantage. I'm very bad at it, but still, in spite of being very bad at it, it's my comparative advantage, which speaks volumes about what is the rest that I can do. So I'll theorize, if you don't mind. And given that the main point of my theorizing was this China is an extremely contradictory country on which I very much refrain from calling prediction shots. And it's been so to my eyes for about 30 years since I met Ping in graduate school and started learning a bit about China from Chinese. He might have been the first true Chinese I ever spoke in my life. I guess so. And so being a very contradictory country, that was the message I wanted to get to you and articulate a bit. The first two presentations, which I did not know about, have been perfect. One with its optimism, the other with its warning, both true to some extent, both false to another. And so I'm going to elaborate on it for a bit. First of all, on the slowdown, what's the surprise? I mean, what's the surprise? I find somewhat entertaining this debate about, is it going to be 6.9 or 6.3 or 6.7? What's the confidence interval around it? About 22? Come on, guys, let's get serious. Who cares? All right? No, I'm sure if you're a businessman and you're talking about your own particular shoe line, 6.7 versus 6.3 may make the difference between profit and losses. But maybe if you have a very tight business, maybe those 4 decimal of a percentage point may make the difference. But at the level at which we are debating, it's really not an issue, point number one. Point number two, this is a country that, yes, started very poor, and I think Peter's numbers were very refreshing, reminding us what the average income is. It's still behind Russia, which we all consider a failing country with increasing poverty. So the average number is low, but this country has been growing for 35 years with almost no really sensible oscillation, at least judging from the official macro numbers, right? Which speaks volume about the fact that it's probably not a market economy, very far from being a market economy. Market economies oscillate. It's in their nature. There is just no way out. Even in the Industrial Revolution, there were miracles. Even in the miracles of post-war, post-Second War Europe, there were cycles. So, market economies oscillate. But nevertheless, this is an economy that has been growing on average more or less 10, 11 percentage points for 30, 35 years. It's about time it slows down. That's what the model predicts. I'll get to it. So let's forget about cyclical oscillation or not. There is a sense in which is slowing down. And some of the things that we all know are there on the table. What was called the demographic advantage, which I would call the cheap labor advantage, is coming to a halt. And that's a theme I will try to come back later, because it suggests that we should learn something more, which I don't know, and I've been looking around, but apparently nobody has studied it. What the hell are those 46% of Chinese still living in rural China doing, given they produce 9% of GNP? Are they all old people retired? Is their productivity that low? Are they so unskilled that they're essentially becoming unusable for manufacturing? Because that was the big advantage on which China eventually actually built up its tremendous expansion, having a very large, by the hundreds of millions, workforce, which was educated enough to be put on the manufacturing line with modern machinery and technology, producing stuff at almost the same quality your Western worker, at a price that was so dramatic, at a cost that was so dramatically lower, that makes the thing enormously profitable and tempting. And that was the base of it. Yet the rest came, in particular the infrastructure and so on. So that seems to be, for what I understand, coming to an end. And I think it's one first point of reflection. That's certainly, in my view, the major cause of the slowdown. Is that an issue of middle income trap? The middle income trap is mostly a creation of ill-advised development economists that are focused too much on Latin America without studying it, and getting confused by a statistical figment. The middle American countries, in the world pre-1990, by the way, were middle-income countries and had been so for a long time. And because they did not grow for their own particular political internal things, we invented a strange economic phenomenon called the middle income trap. It should be called the Latin American problem. And it's nothing to do with being middle income and not catching up. You know, most European countries have been middle income. Ireland was middle income. They caught up and surpassed. So let's, look around. Taiwan was middle income, doesn't seem to be suffering of the problem, nor I will say North Korea. South Korea was middle income. And so, no, I don't think there even exists a problem of a middle income trap. Which also brings me, I have a bit, I liked a lot France's data, but let me be honest there. I would be very careful to trust growth regressions with Chinese macro data. We already don't trust them even for the US, which is probably the best statistical data for macro thing we have available. And so I don't know what to make of it, very honestly. On the issue of saving, let me also play the theorist again and give both a warning and explanation. It seems to me that the huge saving, apart from the imperial component of it, which was let's buy a huge amount of US Treasury bonds so we show them how powerful we are. On the family side, it seems to be the very rational reaction that any model rational behavior would predict in front of demographic policies. In a country in which traditionally for centuries, like the one I originally come from, it's the children that take care of the parents when they age. And this is done in a rural economy with the usual rule we know. Once you're facing two dramatic transformations that are taking place at the speed of light, moreover. One is dramatic urbanization, the other is a forced reduction in the number of children available. It's quite obvious that the almost automatic reaction has to be, oh my Lord, let's set up some stuff, let's save, because I cannot rely on my two male children when I turn 65. So that seems to be the most natural explanation of the gigantic anomaly of China's very high saving rate. It's coupled with a tradition, but the tradition is there in the culture and so on, and it will probably go with that. Problem is that the time with which it will go is very long. I mean, the government of China has finally decided to stop with that policy, but they're about 30 years too late. That's a part I cannot really say anything about, but I'm very worried. It's very strange, right? Think of a demographic drop of that entity happening all of a sudden in a country that has built its economic expansion for 3 decades on having abundant, relatively efficient, but essentially cheap labor force. And is now entering a phase in which the abundant part is gone and the extremely cheap is also gone. If I had the data, if the data were available on the economic geography of this, on the territorial distribution by cities and areas, one could try to theorize about. Unfortunately, at least they're not available to me, or I don't know where to find them. But I think this might be actually one of the main challenges the Chinese economy face. And that gets me to the main point. China is not, people write, my friend Yi Wen is writing a very interesting book. He's made me read it a number of times, but its main theme is that China is different from the rest of the world. So whatever rules we developed, economists, with little wisdoms we learn from studying 300 years of post-industrial revolution, it does not apply to China. That reminds me of Francisco Franco saying the same thing about Spain during the autarky years. It was España diferente, no? Well, it turned out not to be so different once it opened up. So I don't think China is different. I think China is different within. China is just very many Chinas. It's very hard for me to talk about an average China. It doesn't seem to exist. And again, I go back to the data we were showing before. Yes, 750 million people got urbanized, and some of them achieved high productivity. Some of them are living on the border of the industrial society, but still in urban peripheries. How about the other 600 and so? If you think of it, if 30 years were needed to, in some sense, move into industrial society about half of the population, well, there's still other half to go. And it seems to be a piece of the country about which nobody knows anything, other than they have very low productivity. Because that seems to come out from the aggregate number. I repeat, when you have 46% of the population in the countryside, so essentially employed in farming or related activity that produce 9% of GNP, then those guys are either all retired or extremely unproductive. And that's clearly an issue, because that's one of the problems the country may be facing, together with the demographic drop I mentioned before, which is the degree of heterogeneity is growing dramatically. I have no idea what the Communist Party leadership has in mind, and I have no idea which interests they serve or what their internal fights are. But when I look at China and the mainland, and many times I went there, the impression I had, and we are just coming from about 9 days in Wuhan, is of a degree of heterogeneity that, if we measure it properly, would make increasing income inequality in the Western world and the United States disappear in front. I have been impressed by the standards of living that I've observed this time in Wuhan and the prices. It's not, I mean, I have no idea if Wuhan income per capita on average is above 25 US dollar. I very much doubt it is. But I've observed prices in the very center of Wuhan that were of the order of Manhattan on most items, which means that, and then when we have gone to the suburbs, I've seen suburbs where clearly the income per capita is in the order of 4,000 or 5,000 US dollar, way below the 7,000 Peter suggested. That means that we are facing a degree of heterogeneity within a given urban area that is just shocking. Probably you find it in Rio de Janeiro or in Mexico City that are notorious for their slums and so on. But that's something you want to think about, because excess heterogeneity is not only a source of dramatic social tension and therefore strange political movements. I don't want to get into that because I know too little of that. So to me, the working of the Communist Party of China has always been a mystery. I mean, I used to be a sympathizer of Mao theories when I was 16 and ill-informed. Changed my mind rather quickly, don't worry about. By 16 and a half, I was done. But in spite of that, 40-year-long interest, I still don't understand how the party works, so I don't want to speculate on their thing. But let me actually tell something about economics. which comes from heterogeneity. If you think at where somebody mentioned decreasing return and the slowdown is often associated at the theoretical level with the fact that eventually decreasing return sets in. Actually, that's actually not totally true, but it's okay. Let's pretend it is. Where do decreasing return tend to come at the aggregate level in a country, or in the technology of a country that is growing? If you try to think hard about it, they come from the fact that eventually the inputs of production get off balance. There is too much of one of some of them and too little of the other. Very unequal growth tends to also produce that, which seems to be one of the factors that is starting to play a serious role in the macroeconomy of China. If you think of the China of the 80s and 90s, the one growing at 10, 11%, it was quite clear that there was oversupply of all the factors you needed. The rest of the world was willing to bring in all the capital and technology you wanted. It was not frontier technology. You did not have, Silicon Valley coming in. You had essentially mature technologies that were looking for cheap labor force. Capital, machines, and equipment were abundant and easy to produce. These are the years in which the price of machinery keeps decreasing at a remarkable speedy rate. And so both the two essential factors were there, and they were very, very abundant. When one of those does not grow as fast as the other, that's when decreasing return come in. There is an example that I use for my students to make them understand the von Neumann model of economic growth, which is an example due to Thiele and Koopmans, in which it shows an integrated economy that grows rabbits and humans. And obviously, the humans feed the grass to the rabbits and then eat the rabbits and so on. The rabbits per se can grow at 50%, but he points out that in that economy, as long as the humans are needed to raise the rabbits, that economy is not going to grow at the rate of the rabbits. It's going to grow at the rate of the humans. And the humans grow a lot slower. An economy, eventually, in the long run, once you go beyond the cycle, always grow at the rate of growth of its slowest growing input. And today it seems to me, and I come to my point, that the slowest growing income of China is decently skilled or high-skilled human capital labor force. The numbers that I saw were actually shocking. They're really bad, actually. I'm not... if I had to give policy advice, I would probably insist mostly on that. When you think of a country that, with this dimension and with this level of poverty and unskilled workforce, is spending only less than 4% of its GNP in public education, you're thinking of a country that is essentially deciding to have skilled labor growing at a much lower rate than the economy needs, much lower rate. That is, it's easy out of a back of the envelope calculation to realize that that's the size of the cohorts you're putting in higher education, then you're going to face a shortage of high-skilled work. Where high-skilled work here, let's be clear, doesn't mean people with PhDs. It means people with very good high school diplomas and college diplomas. I'm not asking for rocket scientists. That seems to be the major imbalance. So honestly, when I'm trying to think at the slowdown, it seems to me that that's, from the point of view of policy, the major thing that I've learned, both from your presentation, but also, I have to say, from the things I saw during the trip, during this last trip. And the question then becomes, what you want to grow, whom do you want to educate? Let me add my last food for thought, again, from the point of view of the theorists. One thing that has certainly happened over the last 20, 25 years that I've visited the mainland China, and I've noticed that its economy has become enormously more complex than it used to be. So it's scary to hear the things that Peter was reporting to us, and many others during this trip have been reporting. There is of a tendency to go back to the planning, to go back to the fencing, to get central government and state bureaucracies rule the game. Why? Well, let me invite you to think about Russia. You see, if you read economic literature in the 40s and 50s, people as brilliant as Schumpeter had got, and a very free market character like Schumpeter, got convinced that socialism was working and central planning was working. In fact, Schumpeter wrote his infamous book, because he ruined his reputation in my eyes, called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, in which he gave up everything good he had contributed before, out of a sheer and explicit fear of the fact that the socialist system was working. Obviously, it was an illusion. But once you look at the number, it was only a partial illusion. The point was it was a temporary truth. Central planning in Russia worked decently well in the 20s, extremely well in the 30s and 40s, and kept going a bit for the 50s. Why? Because it was a simple economy that was enormously catching up from a extremely poor rural economy with those of Western Europe. And so it was easy, essentially, when you had abundant labor, get the capital and technologies from the Western economy, replicate with central planning something very similar, mutatis mutandis, to what China has done between 1980 and 2010. As soon as you come near the frontier and you exhaust that share of your labor force that is decently skilled to work in the modernized factory, you stop. By the 1960s, Russia started to lag behind, and then we discovered in the 80s that they were so far behind economically to the Western world that they were crashing. Why? Because past that level of, I would call, almost primitive accumulation, the complexity of the system becomes so huge that there is no way central planning can even remotely approximate the ability of the market to manage information. So it seems to me that if it is true what I read and what I understand of that part of the 700 million people of China that have urbanized and moved into the industrial world, if this is the tendency today, which is to bring back and fence back and give more power to central bureaucracy, this may be, together with the demographic and the lack of skilled labor, the third major risk factor. It may be disastrous. There's just no way. While central planning may decently manage to program steel plants and mass agriculture and dams and electricity production, you know, all the big things that are relatively easy, there's just no way the central planning can manage the complexity of innovation at the frontier in today's society. And so if that's the tendency of the current government, I think it would be good advice to suggest to them to relax on that side and trust the markets a bit more. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for very valuable insights, despite, you know, it's from a theorist and non-China expert. Okay. Okay, now we have the young but distinguished speaker from the economics CUHK. So let's welcome Michael Song.
So a couple of months ago, when Ping asked me to talk about this topic, I think I'm supposed to be very negative, as negative as I can. But I feel pretty much relieved when I heard, you know, Mr. Yang and Professor Baldwin's talk. You know, they have already raised a lot of tough issues. And what I'm going to talk about today is pretty much related to what they have presented to us, especially, you know, Mr. Yang's question about how the business cycle has been thinking about, you know, all these puzzling things in China. And by the way, the thing I'm gonna present to you is primarily based on my joint work with Wen Bai and Chang Taixie. So I'm going to very briefly go through, you know, the institutional foundations of China's growth over the past 3 decades. What kind of institutional arrangements in China that actually end up paying the very rapid growth in China? That's actually a long-standing issue. On the one hand, China has pretty weak formal institutions. So say that we see a lot of red tape, we see a lot of regulations, entry barriers, and not to say, you know, completely incomplete legal infrastructure. But on the other hand, China is one of the very few low-income countries that managed to grow very fast So how do we think about this puzzle? And the second thing I'm going to talk about is, Professor Lei and Mr. Yang have already mentioned that, well, one big thing that China now is experiencing in this kind of anti-corruption campaign. And what is the implication of this anti-corruption campaign? And from the institutional viewpoint, I would argue, this thing is undermining one of the cornerstones that underpin past economic growth in China. And also, I'm also going to talk about another thing which has largely been neglected in the discussion, that is the stimulus package, the so-called stimulus package, fiscal stimulus package, Chinese government introduced into China since 2009. So let me first show you, this cartoon. Showed up last year in one of Chinese newspapers, and the story is about a poor private entrepreneur in Hainan province who spent about more than 2 years to try to get a license for building a factory dorm or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And that private entrepreneur spent a lot of time actually afterwards to dig out what made him so painful to get this license. And this is what he found out. He found that he needs more than 30 administrative approvals. That requires about 100 stamps. And if everything goes perfectly, it will take you more than 207 days. Okay. And that comes as no surprise. Mr. Yang has already mentioned that, right? China, if you look at doing business indicator constructed by the World Bank, you will see China is almost sitting at the bottom. Neighboring countries like Venezuela and Iraq, you'll be surprised to hear that, but that's true. Actually, Chinese government has been very angry about this, and they have been pressing the World Bank to change the index, to change the calculation. And one of my co-authors was sitting in the committee, try to figure out what's wrong with this index. But, it turns out, let me tell you a bit more about how they construct this index. They calculate, for this particular category, they calculate how much of procedures you have to go through in order to start a new business. So China get a number like 13 or 14. And the average number you see among OECD countries is about 6 or 7. So that's the main reason why China was ranked at the bottom. But the issue is, as Mr. Yang mentioned, what makes China so attractive for so many entrepreneurs? And why you see such a high investment rate in this country with very poor, very weak formal economic institutions? So here's the story which might be able to share some light on this puzzle. So this is about the story. This is a story basically about Foxconn. This is a well-known company, and the top figure, the top picture, is about the welcome ceremony organized by Henan province. So, previously Foxconn was essentially located in coastline areas of China, and a few years ago they started to move their business towards the inland China in order to save labor costs and land costs. And you can see, the person with tie and put his best smile on his face is actually the governor of that province. So basically that means, who has the more bargaining power? It's not the party officer. Instead, that's the chairman of Foxconn. Okay. And then let's take a look at how long does it take for Foxconn to make this thing happen. From the very first day, the negotiation started until the point that the factory started to assemble iPhone 5. And now, 90% of 6 iPhone are actually assembled in that production plant. And it takes Foxconn less than 3 months to finish everything. And for those of you who read Chinese, you can see, what does it mean, right? So that means the city government actually built up a road for Foxconn exclusively in order to speed up the construction. So that is totally inconceivable in most other countries, right? How can that be the case? But so this sharp contrast between, the poor guy in Hainan province and what they call, Zhengzhou speed. This is actually what Zhengzhou people and Zhengzhou local officials are very proud of. If you think about the difference in these two cases, and it will make you think that, well, there's something informal in China. There must be some informal institutional arrangements that attract, entrepreneurs to make a successful story. So what kind of things we know this. We have a terminology for this informal institutional arrangement. We call it crony capitalism. But when we think about crony capitalism, most of the time, we start thinking about negative things. We say that inequality, distortions, inefficient resource allocation, and so on and so forth. And that's true. If you think about, if you introduce crony capitalism into countries like Switzerland, and of course, that's bad. That reduces welfare, that causes welfare losses. But the thing is, if you think about crony capitalism in a country with pretty weak formal institutions, especially if you think about it, it's really difficult to improve formal institutions. It's very hard. Then, crony capitalism might offer a second way for the economy to grow without any significant improvement in its formal institutions. And on top of that, there are a few Chinese characteristics actually make China quite unique in amplifying, the good sides of the benevolent sides of this crony capitalism. For instance, if you think about China, China is actually a country with very strong state capacity. Let's get back to the story of Foxconn. You can see that, right? Local governments in China have a lot of resources to mobilize. They control land, they can offer land for free. Well, they can convince local banks to make loans to their cronies. And they have the authority to break into existing rules. For instance, the poor Hainan guy has to spend 2 years to get his business registered. But in the case of Foxconn, it can be done within a month. So this is a pretty unique thing for China if you compare China with many other developing countries. So this is a country with a very strong government. And the second thing is, well, you may argue, in Mao's regime, China's state capacity probably was stronger than today's China. Then why it failed to deliver fast economic growth? Well, the answer is very simple. There was no right incentive mechanism for these rulers to deliver growth. At that time, in the Mao's regime, if you think about economic growth, if you want to strike, special deals with entrepreneurs, and you literally get killed. So no incentive. But if you compare today's China with Mao's China, what makes a big difference is exactly the transition in terms of the incentive mechanism. Well, putting it this way, in an extremely simple way, we can call it bribes. We can call it corruption. But this thing actually takes place in a lot more subtle and complicated fashion. For instance, promotion, potential political benefits can also broadly define as private benefits for these party cadres or government officers. And even if you think about economic benefits, it's not just necessarily bribes. For instance, if someone can convince the city mayor, I can send your kids to Washoe St. Louis. Then, well, there is a special deal for you, right? And the last thing is this kind of fiscal discipline. If you think about these powerful rulers, why don't they just offer direct subsidies or transfers to their cronies? A fundamental reason for that is, well, they are constrained by their fiscal capacity. There are two big things in China actually preventing these rulers from doing so. The first thing is the tax reform in the middle of 1990s. So half of the local fiscal revenue has to pay directly to the central government. So that's why, local rulers have much less resources left to pay direct subsidy to their cronies. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, well, local governments are not allowed to raise money directly from the financial sector. They cannot really issue a bond until very recently. They cannot directly borrow from the banking sector. So this kind of a fiscal discipline helps a lot to kind of discipline the local rulers from directly helping their cronies. But let me get to the two major events we see recently that actually can change the whole story. The first thing is the so-called fiscal stimulus package after 2009. Everyone is talking about, this fiscal stimulus package, but actually this is not fiscal policy, that's monetary policy. Why, you don't see any money coming from a fiscal budget. All the resources are coming through the credit channel. As I said, until a few years ago, local Chinese governments were not allowed to raise money directly from local banks. And the trick that allowed them to do so after 2009 is, well, in the middle of 2009, China's GDP growth fell to a historic low. It's about 5% or 6%. And the Chinese authority was very worried about hard landing. So that's why they called up a meeting, talking to these commercial banks to say that now it's time for you to lend to local governments. And how they do that? Well, they say that you can set up, of course, those rules written into the paper cannot be really changed. But we can do a twist. I can set up a state-owned enterprise. So this state-owned enterprise is set up by local government. So this is what we call the local financing vehicle. And this state-owned enterprise can actually borrow money directly from local local financial sector. So that's the main reason why you see this explosion in China's debt to GDP ratio. You can see in that single year, if you look at the gray area, you can see in 2008, well, the new bank loans issued by China's commercial banks were actually doubled in that single year, increased from something like 4.5 trillion yuan all the way to 9 trillion yuan. And after that, well, the China's banking regulatory commission understand, there's a big threat to the financial stability. That's why they try to slow down the speed of making new bank loans. However, well, we see the rise of China's shadow banking activities. So this pink area just tells us how fast this shadow lending is in China, has been in China. So putting everything together, you will find that debt to GDP ratio has been rising from 120 or 110 a few years ago to something close to 200. So that happened within a very short period of time, just 5 or 6 years. And why this is very disturbing? For two reasons. One is its macro implication, and the other is its institutional implication. Let's first talk about macro implication. Even if we buy official statistical data, and what we're going to see here is, well, if you look at the left panel, it tells us China's real capital returns has been falling dramatically. So this is a bit inconsistent with what Professor Lei estimated, but we can talk later, what makes such a difference between the two time series results. But just to let you know, before 2004, China had very high and stable capital returns, roughly around 20%. But after 2008 to 2009, you can see a big jump in this aggregate returns using, official statistical data. you see this rate of returns fell dramatically from something close to 18% all the way to 8% or 9%. Okay. So that suggests something big is happening. And moreover, if you look at the right panel, it tells you, well, there's no free lunch. A lot of capital are flowing towards those sectors that are dominated by the government. It's not necessarily just the state sector. There are many private firms that are connected to the government. And where are the resources coming from? They're coming from the market sector. They're coming from the market sector where those private entrepreneurs are operating, and those guys are not so much connected to the government. So that's why you see, well, the interest rate, a lot of interest rates in China are heavily regulated, but there are the few market determined interest rate. For instance, one example is this rate of returns to wealth management product. In a simple way, this is just term deposit rate to term deposit. Official deposit rate was regulated, heavily regulated, until very recently. But this rate is not so. By looking at the trend of this rate, they can tell you, well, how market is responding to this fiscal stimulus package. And you can see after 2009, there's actually an increasing trend telling us the market sector has been squeezed. I guess I don't have much time to go through the firm level evidence. We can have access to the latest firm level evidence. It tells us, well, resource allocative efficiency at the firm level is getting worse. We already know, for instance, if you look at this panel, just look at the left panel, it tells you the horizontal line is firm size and vertical line is the rate of returns to capital. We already know that in China, if you measure firm size by employment, you will see this rate of returns to capital is falling in firm size. By the way, this is very different. This is probably the only country around the world with decent firm level data exhibiting this pattern. In most of the countries, for instance, the US, you see this flat line. And in China, you see this downward sloping line. In India, you see this upward sloping line. And China is the only country featuring this downward sloping line. And the reason...
That's employment percentage.
Right, that's employment. It's not revenue, it's employment.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. So what does it tell us? By the way, you may think that's a pattern driven by state-owned enterprises. No, the figure I'm plotting here is the figure is using the data excluding state-owned enterprises. If we bring state-owned enterprises back, it will make things even worse. So it tells us big firms are getting a lot of, they have access to cheap credit. They get a lot of help from the state, from the Chinese government. So that's why the reason, if you're bigger, you can actually have a better access to cheap credit, so that you can have you will be associated with lower capital returns. And this thing has been in China for decades, but no systematic change to this pattern until 2009. And if you use the latest data, what you're going to see is, well, once again, because of the time constraint, let's just look at the left panel. It tells us YK growth in the post-2008 period. So it tells us, well, bigger firms, their capital returns are getting even lower. So these large firms, these cronies, they get more help, they get more resources from the Chinese state. And of course, there's no free lunch. Someone has to pay the bill. And who are the firms paying the bill? These small firms. So you can see these small firms, their rate of return to capital are growing. This is not a good sign. That's a bad sign. They're indicating, their capital cost has been growing a lot faster than their large counterparts. So let me just use one last minute to talk about this anti-corruption campaign. Well, let's just talk about these three pictures, starting from the left. So this is a protest we see in China a couple of years ago, in 2008. That's a protest in Hunan province. Well, what they are protesting for, they're trying to convince the central government to build up a station, a high-speed railway station in their city. And by the way, you can tell the difference between these two protests. The protests in the left, everyone dressed up in the uniform way. And they have their smiles on their faces. So this is actually a protest organized by local government. Now let's move on to the middle figure. That's the latest protest reported by Wall Street Journal. That is happening in a place called the Ling Street, very close to the city of Chongqing. So they're exactly protesting for the same thing. They try to convince the central government to build up a railway station in that city. Well, you can clearly see the difference, right, between the two protests. And this is not a protest organized by the local government. Instead, you see the right figure. You see a serious clash between police and the protesters. So that's why Wall Street Journal is interested in this event. Well, that tells us fundamentally the incentive mechanism has been changed. Local government used to be very interested in helping local business community to get resources. But now, largely because of this anti-corruption campaign, they don't have the incentive to do that. So this is what they call, bureaucratic inaction or government inaction. Any way out? Well, there could be two situations. One is get back to the old model. And the other thing is switching to the so-called standard model, which you see, everyone has, the government is trying to provide a kind of level playing field. But the worst, we don't have a strong view, which model China should take in the short run. Of course, in the long run, everyone understands that we have to make a transition towards the standard model. But the worst situation is get stuck in between. Say that you don't have the right incentive, but local government still sitting on tons of resources. So that's the worst situation you can think about. All right, thanks a lot for your patience.
And Professor Song will take over the next stage. Yeah.
Okay, we have four very interesting, stimulating speakers, and we have 20 minutes for Q&A. Well, I have been a student of the Chinese economy since my graduate student days, and if you look at the color of my hair, you know that that is very long ago. And I've always been fascinated by the divergence in forecasts of the Chinese economy. It has always ranged from doomsday, that is, it is going to break up soon, okay, to forecast that China is going to surpass the US quite soon. So quite often we have very divergent views, and we have some divergent views today, on returns to capital and so on and so forth. But I think, for all four speakers, there is one thing in common that all agree that we have a structural change going on. Maybe we are reaching a point of inflection, be it a change in the incentive mechanism, or that the demographic dividend, that cheap labor is disappearing. I think all four speakers think that there is some serious structural change going on, and we may reach a point of inflection. And from here on, things may be quite different. Okay, yeah, time for questions. Yeah? Okay.
Professor Song, I would like to ask a very broad question, and I would like to share the wisdom with all the speakers here on the panel. What do you think the One Belt, One Road policy initiative would affect the outcome economy of China in the future, and what part can Hong Kong play in this policy?
Okay, I think any one of our speakers?
Professor Lui, you brought that out.
Yeah,
So what,
yeah.
the Belt Road policy.
I don't think that people in Hong Kong can really answer that question. I've encountered lots of government officials, businessmen, and so on, and everybody is talking about it, but nobody seems to be able to provide anything substantive. Okay, my guess is that it's generally beneficial to China if it can be carried out. Now, from the point of view of Hong Kong people, we always emphasize that we want to be international. But in our mind, being international simply means the United States and also Europe, nowhere else. We know very little about the geographic situation, the economic conditions along this one belt and one road. So, and I also don't believe that even the central government know exactly what to do. So they want the people to think about ideas. Just several days ago, I got an invitation from a publisher asking me to write a preface, on a book on One Belt, One Road. And then I thought that I only had to write about 1,000 words, and that's it. So that's a simple job. And then I was told that I should give them an article of 10,000 words. So, but then I had to estimate how much that I know about this subject. I would say that the maximum length that I could write, with a substance, would be 3,000 or 4,000 words. So, and I don't think that other people in Hong Kong know a lot more than me. So I would believe that the government or whatever, or business people should encourage people to study this issue. This is far too early for us to say anything substantive or anything concrete about this whole situation. Maybe it will be a success. Maybe it will turn out to be nothing. I don't really know. Okay.
But any vision is.
No, but one thing that I do want to mention is that the long-term economic growth rate along this one belt, one road may be higher than the traditional growth areas like Europe and the United States, simply because in these places the population is very large, and at the same time this globalization process may narrow down the technological gap. So the growth potential of these places could be higher, but growth potential may not always be translated into actual growth. So the correct policy need to be followed. And I'm always on the optimistic side. Okay.
Yeah, Professor Baldwin. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it is optimistic or pessimistic, but if I may try, I see this more like an imperial foreign policy move than anything much to do with short-run economics, for three reasons. First of all, I like to remind you of the Monroe Doctrine and the relation of late 19th century United States with the Caribbean nations and the northern part of Latin America. This is the set of countries along the Silk Road is, in some sense, the western belt between China and Europe on one hand, but the Middle East on the other. If I'm not confused, that's where, from a demographic point of view and also from a political point of view, a Muslim, quote-unquote, threat may come to mainland China. And if there is any wisdom in the current leaders, you may want to anticipate those problems instead of having to cure them by bombing this and that, like the Europeans have to do. So I see it very much like an act of integration, goodwill, thinking of foreign policy, akin to the movement with respect to Taiwan and the display of, how can I say, world leadership in the meeting with the Europeans. if in the short run it may help some Chinese construction company to use profitably their overcapacity, it may be a side effect. But I tend to think of it more like long-run foreign policy.
Yeah, I guess Professor Baldwin's point is that it is primarily geopolitical. Yeah. Yeah, but for your information, Professor Casey Chen, Chen Ka-keung, who is the Secretary of Financial Services and the Treasury, will speak on One Belt, One Road opportunities for Hong Kong at 5:30, right after this. And down near Chongqing in a Chinese university, and I'm going to chair that talk. Okay, which means that I need to leave soon. Okay, yeah, any other questions? Okay.
Well, I have to declare myself. I'm running a factory in China. So what Michael Song said, open up a company or factory in China, it takes a long time. But I would like to share some good news with you. Now, in certain area like Qinghai, Nanshan, or some other places. So according to the government officials, you can set up a company within a day. So which is a big change in this kind of company setup policy. So this is part of a good news to those people who want to go into China to run business. But second thing that I want to mention is, I'm pretty agree with Peter Yang. So it's not so easy to enter the Chinese market. So one thing you didn't mention is the tax system. The tax system itself is very complicated. So even though I run my factory in China, so my company has right to sell goods in China, but I still have difficulty or obstacles to sell products in China because of the complication of the tax system. So sometimes I really don't know how to figure out how to sell, how to calculate the tax, how much percentage of the tax that I should put on the cost of the product. So this is one of the difficulties of the general people who want to sell products in China, in the sense that they want to sell it to the retailers or to the wholesalers. And sometimes when you talk about the tax refund, so sometimes even though I'm in the business, I really don't know how to tackle this. And another issue that I'm concerned about the social welfare system and aging problem of China. So China is trying to raise the welfare to the well-being or the welfare to the general public of the people. However, for instance, like why the economy of, in the past several decades, the economy can grow so fast? Because the Chinese people would like to work because they want to earn, and they want to make money to send back to their home countries, hometowns. So that's why the economy grows so fast. But under my observation, the young people of Chinese people, in China, the people are looking for more and more welfare. So they want more holiday, they want more leisure. So that's why I'm really afraid that this kind of mentality will jeopardize the growth of the GDP of China. And also another very big issue is the aging problem. So with the 30 years one-child policy in China, so there's very few young people who would like to join the manufacturing sector. So I believe this will jeopardize or undermine the economy of China, and this will slow down the growth, the economic growth of China as well. So this is my personal experience that I want to share with you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Lam. Yeah. Okay.
Let me just quickly respond to your comment. So it happens that I was asked by Guangdong province to write up a kind of evaluation report. In the end, I declined, but I was invited to visit those kind of free trade zones in Guangdong, including Qianhai, Nanshan, and Heqing, a couple of months ago. So I really have a mixed feeling about what they are trying to do or what they have achieved. Well, on paper, this kind of registration issue is kind of largely solved. You can easily set up a private firm. But when it comes to all these kind of detailed regulations, I think most of the regulations are still there. If you talk to these officers in Shanghai and Nanshan, my overall feeling is they are very much frustrated, especially frustrated by those ministers in Beijing. So those ministers in Beijing, they don't have any incentive to push the reform. So actually, there are a lot of stories. I don't know if it is true or not, but they have been talking about that our premier, Li Keqiang, has slammed the table for a couple of times because he was entirely unable to push this reform forward. And I was sitting in a meeting with a few, middle rank officers from Beijing. They are incredibly arrogant.
That's the way of the Chinese officials.
Yeah, so that's the reason why I think Ms. Yang's quotation makes a lot of sense. I really doubt if there is any kind of sincere incentives for Beijing to push reform forward. I don't doubt, I have no doubt that Premier Li Keqiang has some wishful thinkings. But I really doubt if he has the power or the resources to move things forward.
Okay, yeah. Questions from the outer circle and the general audience? Let us have, yeah.
Some of the speakers here have raised the question about the credibility of the figures, the GDP and so on and so forth. We should be happy with 6.8% increase in GDP each and every year. The Western world will be so very happy in case they can even grow at 5%. And I just want to ask a question. What do you think actually is the actual figure for the GDP to the best of the estimate of the economists here? And the second thing is that every time there's a bad figure coming from China, then you get the Wall Street get tumbled. And the integration of the Chinese economy into the Western world seems to be growing thick and fast. And just wonder what will be the repercussion of the rest of the world in case the Chinese economy does deteriorate to a worse state.
Okay, yeah, two specific questions, rate of GDP and impact on the rest of the world. Any?
I actually agree on the comments, but Western countries would be very happy at 2%, given that there is zero population growth. And by the way, population growth does count, right? We want to keep that very in mind. I don't know, the problem is that it's hard to judge the number. For example, one thing I had tried to, probably you know better than me on this, you play with Chinese data a lot more than I do. I am only a reader of other people's work. I never quite understood how they adjust for quality and price indices here. And that's a huge factor in trying to compute real GDP growth. Remember that those numbers are supposed to be real, and we are supposed to be correcting all the price effects. A country undergoing structural transformation dimension of China must have gigantic changes in relative prices. Who knows what's the ability of separating one from the other?
Yeah.
To Professor Bodrin's comment, if we, it will take a really long time to debate on the reliability and accuracy of China's GDP statistics. But a short answer is I used to have a good faith in the quality of GDP, but this year I have been a bit disappointed, exactly for the reason Professor Bodrin has raised. So why I have good faith in it is because if you look at, say, independent sources, say US import from China, and then you set up a statistical model and check that, and you will find that the fitted model is going to generate a time series which is pretty close to official data. But this year, the figure seems a bit strange because, for a long period of time, China experienced nominal GDP growth higher than real GDP growth. But this year, the thing has been flipped. So real GDP growth has been higher than nominal GDP growth. So let me tell you, if you look at manufacturing, if you look at industrial firms' value-added growth, it's almost like zero. And then the industrial sector still, exhibits real growth like 5%, 6%, and that's purely driven by deflation. So, well, as a matter of fact, PPI is going down, that's for sure. But whether or not this so-called real GDP growth makes a lot of sense, especially for the business circle, I doubt. It doesn't make any sense, especially if you think about those deeply indebted firms. Well, their revenue growth is zero. Nominal revenue growth is zero, but still they have to pay a lot of interests. So it doesn't make any sense, right? So it would be very misleading to look at real GDP growth in a period with deep deflation. We're really sensible is just to look at nominal revenue, not to say about the quality of the GDP statistics.
Okay, but how about the effect of the slowdown of the Chinese economy on the rest of the world? I mean, this part of the question has not been addressed.
Well, I'm just, following a bit what you said earlier is that many of the people that I deal with, going back to a micro level, is they have put in so much extra production capacity that you're talking about for any industry sector and for any type of product, probably 200 or 300% over what China really needs. And how these production capacity will be utilized. So obviously the prices are sliding and sliding, and then you have people making losses, and yet the production keeps going. And this is something I could never really figure out, and this has been going on for several years now. It's just that the situation continues. If they're producing something and the price keeps going down, ostensibly, you would have thought that they stopped production. So there's a lot of things that, from a micro level, I couldn't figure out. I couldn't figure out why people would be doing business and losing money when they continue to be in business. It makes very little sense. And that's the reason why I have been sort of putting my foot on the brake pedal and be a bit more cautious about putting extra effort into the China market, because I feel that there will need to be some sort of tallying up at the end. It's just a matter of time. It makes no sense.
Okay, thank you. I guess due to time constraint, we can only entertain 2 more questions. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for your inspiring sharing today. I observe that most of you are talking about the growth, but I'm a little bit concerned about the risk of China economy right now, because as some of you have noticed, that the debt level of China economy has increased rapidly compared to the GDP growth, and also you can see the debt replacement strategy of China seems to be a little bit aggressive and not well received by the government officials and investors as well. So is it a concern that and also by James Channels, long-term bearish on Chinese economy? He said that the credit advance in China just has not burst yet, but when it does, then it will cause a lot of it will serve the economy a lot. So I want to ask you that, would you think that the debt issue in China is really a concern to you, or I'm just too short-sighted or too naive? Thank you.
Okay. The debt situation. Yeah. Francis?
Let me just make a quick comment on this. Now, the rise in the debt ratio coincide with 2 things happening almost simultaneously. The first is that the collapse of the stock market after 2007 or so. Okay, and now the second thing is this fiscal stimulus that was adopted in about 2009 or so. Well, I don't agree with that stimulus. This fiscal stimulation policy adopted by the government at that time. I think it has created more problems than the problems that it has solved. Okay. Now, but then after this stock market collapse, we have seen that for many years, well, the stock index has been remaining very low, and in more recent years has gone up somewhat. But that also implies that there's a failure for the financing to be supplied by equity. Now, from 2008 to now, the total new addition to the capital stock should be pretty close to 100 trillion yuan. This is simply because the China's saving rate is very, very high. But where has this 100 trillion yuan gone? I don't think that the stock market has really been absorbing this. Well, a big chunk of this may have gone to the real estate market, but a part of this should be going to the banks. So instead of using the stock markets to finance the investment, they have to rely on bank financing or shadow banking and so on. Well, should this be a concern? I mean, should we worry about the debt, or if we don't use this kind of debt financing, we use the stock market? Well, the risk level may be somewhat different, but the multi-granular theorem tells us that it should not really be causing a big difference unless there's some kind of distortions like the distortions due to the taxation and so on and so forth. And I believe that if China wants to reduce this debt ratio, well, somehow reforming the stock market should be one of the first steps that it should really do. Okay.
Okay, last question. Anyone? Okay.
We have talked about so many pitfalls, so many wrong things about the Chinese economy. It's not a market economy. Everyone knows that. But then the stability of the GDP figures, as I kept mentioning, is keeps so stable each and every year. So 7%, 6.8%, 7%, 7.5%. Even for not a market economy, even for control economy, that cannot happen. Otherwise, everyone will have a state-owned type of control over the economy. So how do you comment on the economy with being so stable over the years, for the last 20 years, keep on rising? In fact, keep on going 7%, it will basically engulf the whole economy in the world in case keep on going another 30 years. Not only will it surpass the United States of America, it will also be the biggest and also the only economy in the world. So I still have some reservation about the figures. So, as Professor said here, says he does not rely on the figures, official figures. So, what do you rely on then? in terms of analysis.
Well, I come here from time to time. I check what people are doing, and that's a good indicator. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm not joking actually. So it's quite clear that there is a lot of real growth. Now, look, I mean, you're putting it in a paradoxical way, right? It's still a long way to go. Remember what the figures we were looking at before that Peter showed, right? Mm-hmm. The average income is still $7,000. That means a lot of people are probably going on 3,000. That's what, a 15th of U.S. Real income? So before, yeah, there's a lot of Chinese, I know. So, even small income multiplied by a big number gives you a huge GNP. But then for that matter, there's a lot of Indians too. But between that and income per capita, there is
yeah. Professor
one quick comment on this. I don't really think that the GDP growth figures have been really that stable. It still fluctuates somewhat. For example, in 1990, after the June 4 thing, the GDP growth rate did go down quite a bit, but well, it's still a positive growth rate. But it will be misleading for us to believe that the GDP growth rate is just flat. And on the issue of whether the data are reliable or not, we always have to use some other methods to check the data. For example, we know that the longevity data or the life expectancy data is much more reliable. And then that data, I mean, that piece of data generally will be, will have a very strong correlation with the per capita GDP growth rate. And I myself like to go to visit places where the ordinary consumers are spending. So 10 years ago, when you went to China and then you went into a Starbucks, perhaps the chance is that you won't see too many people there. It's too expensive. But today, it's different. I mean, you may even have to line up in order to go to Starbucks. Starbucks is expensive. Okay, I mean, at least from the Chinese standard, it's as costly as that in the U.S. So, and one of the things that I remember is what Stephen Zhang Mungshang, okay, has emphasized. You can always identify a lot of wrongdoings and misguided policies in China. I can list tons of this myself, okay? But how come that they still can grow actually very substantially? There must be something correct that they have done, okay? Otherwise, it won't make sense at all, okay? So for us, of course, we should continue to find out what mistakes that they have made and then correct those mistakes. But then, for one of the correct things that they have done, I think is the education part. The government has made the mistake of not investing enough in the education. That part is a mistake, but the Chinese people actually invest maybe too much, I would say. Well, they're very concerned about the education of the children. That is a very important driving force, and to me, that is the main reason why I remain somewhat optimistic about the Chinese economy. Okay.
Thank you. I think we must move to the next session. Professor Wang, and I need to leave.
Thank you, Professor Song, and thank you all for your active participation in the discussion. So we will now have Professor Wang to deliver the closing address. Professor Wang, please.
Well, thanks everybody. We have seen very nice panel presentation and also heated discussion. So we have learned, like from misallocation, which may actually have overcapacity and undercapacity, to like barriers to business investment and economic growth. We also learn inefficient central planning in the modern world, and as well as crony capitalism, which may actually have some issues with anti-corruption campaign. So in my own view, let me just use one very simple word to summarize what I think the major problem of the Chinese economic leaders, which is also the political leader. I think it is really the imperial mindset. The imperial mindset tell you we have a symbolic target first. Any details will be later. We can solve it. This is problematic. Let me just give you 4 simple examples. RCEP, right? Think about RCEP. We even don't know which tariff should be reduced, okay? And we don't know how that will hurt some of the industries and how to help some of the industry to transform. We don't know, okay? One Belt, One Road, and AIIB. We know this is set, and China can be a center in this imperial world, basically, One Belt, One Road. But whether this can only help to solve the overcapacity in construction or anything beyond, we don't know. Okay, SDR currency, very happy to be in by next October. But how much this will affect the China's transparency in monetary policy and also the flexibility in the deregulation of the banking system, we don't know. And finally, anti-corruption. We have no other formal institution law and the system replacing the current crony capitalism system. And in this case, we suddenly have this campaign there. And we have many people in jail already, but how much we have seen is yet to know. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Please be seated. So before the official ending of this forum, let us all give a big round of applause to our guest speakers to thank them for their great presentation for the forum.